Hello everybody, this is Peter Svidler with the highlights video of Game 11 of the World Championship match going on in London between Magnus Carlsen, the world champion, and Caruana. And as mentioned, we will be covering Game 11 of the match, which was a draw. Thank you for watching. This has been Peter Svidler for Chess24. Just kidding. But seriously, I was somewhat tempted by doing this, but it will be slightly unfair. So let's actually proceed to the game in question. And it was, as we suspected it might be, Petrov. Magnus did play d4, c4, and e4 in the first half of the match, and he proceeded to once again play d4, c4, and e4 in the second half of the match in his white games in exactly the same order, which is either very predictable or him giving the best chance for his team to prepare something after finding out what Fabi means to do against those openings. What I mean is he basically he goes 1d4 in game 2 and then repeats 1d4 a week after. So the team has an entire week to prepare to Fabiano's declared Queen's Gambit declined, and the same happens in the English, and now the same happens in the Petrov. And in the Petrov, clearly knight d3 was not going to make a reappearance. Magnus does go for the absolute main line, knight f3, knight takes e4, knight c3, takes, bishop b7, bishop b3, castles, castles, queen d2, knight d7, long castles, and here Fabi in his practice only played c6, and also quite notably Fabi generally used to play the knight c6, queen d2, bishop e6 systems, which are a lot more solid but also offer pretty much zero chances for black to ever fight for all three results. And he did lose a very painful game to Sergei Karyakin in the Berlin candidates in this line. Also, quite notably, the position after castles, queen d2, knight d7, long castles, and knight f6 is apparently the position which featured in the by now infamous, my apologies, Videogate incident, which makes what followed today, frankly, even more surprising. Magnus played bishop d3, which is by far the main move in the position. Fabi replied with c5, and both of my colleagues during the live show, Anish Giri in the first hour, and then Alexander Grishuk when he came on after about an hour of play, knew and explained quite a bit during the live show about the history of this variation. And Anish himself played this against Alexander Motylev in their World Cup match, and there was also many other, well, not many, but a decent amount of other high-level games played in this line, which means that really it should not have come as any kind of a surprise to Magnus and his team. And there was also a very recent game in the St. Louis Winter Classic in which this was played by my good friend Evgeny Miroshnichenko. And this is somewhat relevant because of all the things that Magnus could have repeated, he repeated that game and not all the other things on offer. Rook h1, the move that Magnus made here, is very, very natural. Black goes bishop e6, also to be expected. And here, obviously, it's a very complicated opening position, and I will not even, frankly, attempt to cover it in this video because, first of all, I would not succeed, and secondly, it feels slightly weird for me to be doing a lot of clicking here when it did not seem as if Team Magnus did that in their preparation. Once again, I haven't seen the press conference myself, but Magnus said that he was surprised in the opening. So once again, I can only go by what he himself told the journalists, and also by what he chose to do in this position. For instance, here White has a very sharp option in bishop g5, with a very straightforward intention of going queen a4, queen h4, and basically delivering mate on the king side, which is sort of what the pieces which are on the board right now are hinting White should be doing, because he has those bishops aimed aimed at the black king side, and also quite reasonably placed rooks on the open and semi-open file. And Anish during the live show was saying that d5, queen f4, and in his belief, he did not. He joked that he did not know he needs to check his files before coming to commentate, and he wasn't entirely sure about move orders. But he was saying that rook e8 here, which looks slightly weird, but has a very direct explanation in the variation queen h4, h6, bishop takes h6, gh, queen takes h6, and bishop f8. And black really needs to drive this queen away from the h6 square and also bring the bishop to the defense of his king. So that would be one explanation. And another important subplot here is that if white plays bishop b5, black is more or less obliged to play rook f8. And it looks extremely strange to be losing to tempi like this with black. But the bishop on b5 is actually quite misplaced. It really belongs on d3 in these positions. And despite losing time, black is still doing quite well here. But bishop g5 was not played today. Instead, Magnus played king b1. And now after queen a5, it might actually be advisable for white to play c3, c4, the move that he played, because if you now play a3, black can, for instance, play c4, another idea that Anish showed during the live show. And for instance, bishop f1, knight e4, followed by d6, d5, with already, yeah, I can't draw arrows today, with the ideas of knight takes c3, followed by bishop takes a3. And if you're not particularly well prepared for this with white, it feels frankly ill-advised to be going for this position, because Fabi was blitzing at this point still, and he quite clearly had a very good idea of what is going on here. And if you choose which position you would like to play sort of from the blank state, I think you would pick this position with white and not this position, because this position you might actually lose. And here it feels that you're much more in control of your own destiny. Therefore, after queen b1, queen a5, sorry, king b1, queen a5, Magnus played c4, takes, and here in the recent game in the Winter Chess Classic between Sasha Kiran and Miroshnichenko, Evgeny played rook f8 and equalized quite comfortably if I don't mix up any move orders. And Fabi, still blitzing, played h7, h6, which is arguably an even more concrete way to immediately equalize. And here white, of course, could have gone for sort of the longer plan to play, let's say, h2, h3, followed by perhaps bishop c3, maybe some knight d2, knight e4 ideas. But Magnus went for a move which aims to actually achieve something concrete, but seemingly he either miscalculated or just didn't think he was better in this position, because it seems to lead to more or less a forced draw. He played knight h4, to which Fabi once again more or less instantly replied rook e8. And it's curious to me because it seems like playing the immediate knight g4 may have been an even more straightforward way of doing things. And you reply to both knight f5 and knight g6. I mean, knight g6, rook f8 is a direct transposition to the game. fg6 also equalizes, but there's really no way to dodge rook f8. And I think after knight f5, rook f8, white also has nothing better than taking on a7, transposing to what you will see in a moment. But Fabi started with rook f8, I guess arguing, well, correctly, that having played knight h4, white most likely will play either knight f5 or knight g6 anyway, and there is no way for him to rush with knight g4. Magnus played knight g6. After knight f5, I think knight g4 probably is the cleanest way to solve all of black's issues anyway, because if you play bishop f8, a move which we quite liked during the live show, maybe white can claim he has a little bit of something after knight e3. I'm not convinced it's, well, a lot will be a huge overstatement, of course, but it's probably nothing at all, but at least some pieces remain on the board. And after knight g4, seemingly white still has to go for the exact same line as I mentioned, knight e7, rook e7, and we will see this position in the game. Magnus played knight g6, and here black absolutely has to go knight g4, because if you play bishop d8, knight f4, you have actually conceded quite a bit, and you might be somewhat worse here with black. Not a lot after bishop d7, but you definitely prefer white here. Knight g4, on the other hand, makes a more or less straightforward draw. White takes, you take. The pawn on f2 is a very serious problem for white, so he goes rook e2, knight e5. And now it turns out that there is no way to preserve the bishop on d3 without losing the c4 pawn. And after bishop f4, takes, takes. And the final precise move in the game, basically rook d7. I think that's maybe a slight overstatement, but only a slight one. Black is just completely fine. Takes, takes, takes has been played. Rook d8, rook d2, bishop c4, king c1. And in this position, Fabi's choice, I mean, is perfectly serviceable to make a draw, but he also didn't really even have to beg if he didn't want to. Rook c8 is an immediate equality, and also, if you compare endgames to the one that he got in the game, I was during the live show making an argument for playing a7, a6, just giving up the pawn on c5, playing, let's say, f5 here, or bishop f1, g3, f5, then we go g6, h5, bring the king to e6, and compared to the game, the pawn will be on b7 and not on b5, which means that white more or less never gets to attack it with his pieces. I mean, with his king, because it will be easily defended by the bishop along the long diagonal. And this is, I think, a very dry, very easy technical draw. But Fabi played b6, Magnus played bishop f4, and here, once again, Fabi did not really have to go for the opposite color bishop ending, because he is just not even remotely worse after rook e8. But rook takes d2 is just a, I mean, you know you're not going to lose this position, so I guess he felt reasonably confident doing this. King takes, a6, because the pawn you want to be losing, of course, is not the a pawn, it's the c pawn. So a6 to stop bishop b8, bishop a7. This pawn might actually hang in some variations, so white starts by a3. And now you bring the king to the center so that it's not cut off on g8 and go h5. It's important to go h5 because, as we mentioned, the ideal setup here is everything on the light squares where it cannot be attacked by the bishop. And there's really not a lot you can say about this endgame. Black holds it very, very easily, as has been shown in the game. The game continued king e3, king d7, king d4, g6, g3, bishop e2. Magnus played bishop f8, king c6. And here he could have tried preserving the pawns without trades on the queen side, but let's say after king e5, black can play bishop d1. Let's say you go c3, because I think king f6, bishop c2, king f7, king d5 is also a very, very straightforward draw. There will never be any problems for black dealing with the structure on the king side. And schematically, in a position like this, let's say bishop g4, king f6, bishop e6, black could, of course, do it immediately. You don't have to force c3. It also works here. White just never really creates anything on the king side. The only plan would be to try for some kind of f3 and g4 push. And if white, let's say, goes king g5 and black allows all of that, then you might be in trouble. But of course, you can play bishop d5 here, not even allowing white to play f3. Let's say king f4, black passes, f3, black passes, white plays g4. And now you can simply continue passing with black. White has to take because the king is tied to the defense of the f3 pawn. So you take, you play king g3. You still cannot play king h4 next move, so you go king c6, f4. And here black is not obliged to play f5, but he can also play f5 and make a reasonably easy draw. Because in this position, if white goes king g5, then he cannot really attack this bishop on g4. And if he goes back and plays, let's say, h3, you can play bishop f1. And once again, white would very much like to play king g5, but he cannot because he will lose the pawn on h3. And therefore, white can never make any sort of progress in this position. So it's an easy draw. Magnus played b3 instead and created a passed pawn on the c file. But this is, I mean, nothing really changed. The same principles apply. So Fabi continued passing, and then Magnus brought the bishop over to e3 and did something slightly different. He brought the king over to g5 and then played g3, g4. And here, basically, black has a way to lose if he completely ignores what white is trying to do. Let's say you play bishop e6 check, king g5, and then you continue passing and passing and passing, and then white goes f5, bishop f5, h5, and you resign. But obviously this was extremely unlikely to happen, and in fact it didn't happen. Fabi immediately played bishop a2 here, and he demonstrated this very nice setup, which holds against this idea of playing f5 and forcing black to take. White goes king g5, king f6, h4, f4, then Magnus shuffled a little bit, and then eventually played f5, and black just goes bishop b1, and the trick is, after bishop f2, as was played in the game, black is not threatening to take. Black is just keeping the bishop on this diagonal, always prepared to recapture on g6 with the pawn. And you continue passing, let's say, after king g5, and the only way for white to make progress is to play, let's say, f6 here, after which the bishop switches to this diagonal, and white never obviously makes any progress whatsoever. So the moment Fabi did not take on f5 here and played bishop c2, the game was agreed drawn, and the players now have their final rest day before classical game, and in 2 days' time, on Monday, we will have game 12 of this match. Scores are still tied, all 11 games were drawn. Judging by how games 8 and 10, the last 2 games Fabiano played with white, have gone, game 12 will be quite unlike game 11. Fabi has been getting somewhere with white in those Sicilians. He was arguably at some point slightly worse in game 10, but it was an extremely sharp position, which was very, very difficult to handle by both sides. And you can also make an argument that he got out of the opening there with a promising position, which he just did not play perfectly. And all in all, I think he will try something quite sharp in game 12. In which exact opening we don't really know, but I'm obviously running the risk of being completely wrong about this, but I will say that game 12 is looking very, very promising, the way the match has been going, and in particular the way the dynamic of the team's preparation with white and with black has been going. I think Fabi is a lot more likely to get a position in game 12 which will be quite playable and full of life. And then I think he will push really, really hard to try and finish the match in the main 12 classical games, because as we keep on repeating, he is not a sitting duck in the shorter time playoffs, but he will start as a significant underdog. And that also means that Magnus might actually get his chances to win the entire match outright by catching Fabi on the backswing and winning with black. So that game should be quite exciting, as frankly opposed to this one, which could have been exciting if Magnus felt like challenging black's opening preparation, but he didn't, and it was a very, very dry affair. This does conclude now my coverage of Game 11 of the World Championship. I hope you enjoyed this video. Thanks for watching. This has been Peter Svidler for Chess24.